doctor fired for saving the life of a homeless man, but they had no idea who he really was. Dr. Evelyn Grant was a force within Lakeside General Hospital's bustling emergency room. Her dedication to her patients, her unyielding belief that every life mattered, and her calm under pressure had earned her a reputation as both compassionate and fiercely capable. Her colleagues often joked that she had nerves of steel, but Evelyn knew her strength came from something deeper, a fundamental belief that everyone deserved a fighting chance, especially those who had fallen through society's cracks. It was on a bleak, rainy night that Evelyn's convictions were put to the ultimate test. The hospital had been relatively quiet until a call crackled through the intercom, summoning her to the emergency room entrance. Outside, paramedics wheeled in a man found barely conscious in a nearby alleyway. His clothes were tattered, clinging to his thin frame, soaked through with rain and stained with blood. It was clear he'd been the victim of a vicious attack, perhaps a robbery gone wrong, or maybe something more sinister. His face was battered and bruised, one eye swollen shut, and there were angry, dark purple marks along his ribcage where blunt force had clearly done damage. The nurses worked swiftly, transferring him from the gurney to the operating table, while Evelyn quickly examined his injuries. His breathing was shallow, and his pulse erratic, but there was life there, flickering, fragile, and worth saving. Evelyn glanced at his worn, weathered face and felt an unexpected pang of empathy. She'd seen countless patients over the years, but something about this man struck her as different, as though he carried a story too heavy for any one person to bear alone. In the moments that followed, Evelyn instructed her team with precision. "We're stabilizing him now," she said, her voice steady, her eyes focused. But as she began the emergency procedure, a figure appeared in the doorway, casting a shadow across the room, Dr. Collins, her direct supervisor. A man known for his adherence to hospital protocol and budgets, he stepped inside with a disapproving look. "Dr. Grant," he began in a measured tone, "we have to be mindful of our resources. This man is a John Doe, no insurance, no next of kin, no name in our system. You know the directive." He paused, casting a glance at the homeless man with a flicker of distaste, then back to her. "We can't afford to spend time and resources on a case that doesn't guarantee compensation." Evelyn felt a surge of anger rise within her, but she fought to keep her voice calm. "This man was left for dead, Dr. Collins. We are here to save lives, not make judgments about which ones are worth saving." Her gaze didn't waver as she continued, "I took an oath, and I intend to honor it." Collins narrowed his eyes, his face hardening. "This could cost you, Evelyn." "Think about that," he said, before turning on his heel and leaving the room, his warning hanging heavily in the air. Evelyn steadied herself, determined not to let her frustration cloud her focus. She had no choice, she couldn't just walk away from a man in need. Ignoring the tension, she returned her attention to her patient. As her hands worked with meticulous care, stabilizing his injuries and addressing his wounds, she had no inkling that this decision would soon set off a chain of events that would threaten her career, her values, and uncover secrets about this man that no one could have anticipated. In the days following the emergency, Dr. Grant couldn't shake the image of the man she'd saved. He was still in critical condition, and though he remained unidentified, Evelyn made a point to check on him whenever she could. His hospital records were blank except for the name he'd been assigned, John Doe number 27. Despite the bruises and lacerations that marred his face, there was an undeniable air of mystery about him, as if his past held secrets that only he could reveal. Outside of her interactions with John Doe, Evelyn's world was as routine as it was intense. Lakeside General Hospital was a constant flurry of motion and emotion, and for Evelyn, it was a second home. Her colleagues admired her tenacity and skill, though some found her uncompromising nature frustrating, especially Dr. Collins. Known for his firm grip on hospital policies, Dr. Collins had always been focused on the bottom line. For him, every case was weighed by cost, insurance, and the hospital's strained resources. Evelyn, on the other hand, believed that each patient, regardless of their background, deserved attention and care. This fundamental difference created a quiet tension between them, one that simmered below the surface and had been growing since she joined Lakeside General years ago. Dr. Collins respected her skill, but her tendency to bend the rules often left him uneasy, especially in cases like John Doe No. 27's. As Evelyn grew more invested in her patient's recovery, she noticed something odd. Despite his unresponsiveness, his hand occasionally twitched, and his lips moved slightly as though caught in some fractured memory or dream. She could swear that once, as she adjusted his fore, he mumbled a name, but it was too faint to hear clearly. Her curiosity was piqued, and she became more determined than ever to understand who this man was. The question lingered in her mind: what had happened to him? And why did he seem so familiar, even though she was certain they'd never met? As she dug deeper, Evelyn found herself at odds not only with her supervisor but with hospital administration as well. They weren't pleased with her choice to treat a patient without insurance, and her frequent check-ins on John Doe raised eyebrows. But Evelyn wasn't one to back down. Each day, she combed through any information she could find on unidentified assault victims, hoping to uncover something that might shed light on his story. She spoke to local authorities, even reaching out to nearby shelters to see if anyone recognized him, but each lead was a dead end. Meanwhile, her personal life remained a quiet contrast to the intensity of her work. Evelyn lived alone in a small apartment overlooking the city. Her evenings were often spent reviewing cases or preparing for the next day. She had long accepted that the life she'd chosen left little room for relationships or relaxation. Yet, since John Doe's arrival, her thoughts often wandered to him even after her shifts, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. One evening, while Evelyn was in her office, she received an unexpected visit from Dr. Collins. He entered unannounced, his usual stern expression tinged with something more. "Evelyn, I don't know what you're hoping to find with this patient," he began, folding his arms. "We've done our due diligence. He's unidentified, uninsured, and unlikely to survive. Continuing to invest time in him isn't just impractical, it's irresponsible." Evelyn met his gaze, her voice calm but resolute. "I'm a doctor, Collins. I can't just ignore someone because they don't fit our protocols. If that's irresponsible, then I'll bear that responsibility." Dr. Collins looked at her for a long moment before letting out a sigh. "Have it your way, but don't say I didn't warn you," he said, leaving her with a final, tense look before disappearing down the hall. Returning to her work, Evelyn couldn't ignore the sense that she was on the edge of a discovery, one that went beyond hospital policies and regulations. This case had stirred something in her, a mix of compassion and curiosity that kept her reaching for answers, even when logic told her to let go. She began to wonder if there was something bigger connecting her to this man, a feeling that made her wonder if fate had somehow brought him to her. Days turned into weeks, and while John Doe's physical wounds slowly began to heal, his identity remained a mystery. Dr. Grant was drawn to him with a fascination that bordered on obsession, spurred by her curiosity and compassion. He was no longer just a nameless patient, he had become a puzzle that she felt compelled to solve. Her interactions with him grew more attentive, watching for any sign, any twitch or murmured word, that might hint at his identity. Then, one evening, just as Evelyn was finishing her rounds, she found John Doe's bed surrounded by nurses whispering to each other in a hushed panic. His heart rate had spiked dangerously, his breathing shallow and erratic. She sprang into action, stabilizing him just in time, but as he slipped back into unconsciousness, he managed to utter a single word: "Regis." That one word sent a ripple of shock through her. She replayed it in her mind, feeling a surge of recognition that she couldn't place. Regis wasn't just a name, it was familiar. Her instincts told her it was important, a breadcrumb on the trail to understanding who he really was. She went to the hospital's records, searching through any mention of Regis in their files, hoping to uncover some clue. But hours of searching led to nothing. Frustrated, she reached out to a contact in local law enforcement, asking if there were any recent missing persons reports or criminal cases tied to that name. As the days wore on, the hospital's patience with her waned. Dr. Collins, frustrated with her refusal to let go, approached her with an ultimatum. "Evelyn, enough is enough. Your work here is invaluable, but you're putting your career on the line for someone who may never wake up, who has no place in our system. The board is watching this case closely, and it's affecting the entire department. You have a choice, either focus on your actual cases or risk losing everything." Evelyn felt the weight of his words but couldn't bring herself to turn away from the man who'd come to represent more than just a patient. He was her stand against the system, a life that deserved dignity. "I hear you, Dr. Collins," she replied, "but I can't abandon him. If I don't help him, no one else will." As the tension mounted, her search for answers led her to dig deeper into nearby shelters and the city's homeless community. One night, Evelyn visited a shelter known for assisting people in dangerous situations, describing John Doe to the workers there. Most didn't recognize him, but one man, who had a knowing look in his eye, offered a quiet warning: "If you're looking for this guy, it's best you keep it to yourself. People disappear for knowing less." Evelyn's blood ran cold. She sensed that she was getting closer to uncovering something significant, but she also realized the risk she was taking. Returning to the hospital, she couldn't shake the unease of that man's words. Her intuition told her there was a hidden danger surrounding John Doe, one that she was only beginning to comprehend. That night, while poring over her notes in her dimly lit office, Evelyn received a call from her law enforcement contact. He had managed to uncover something about a man named Regis who had disappeared years ago, a high-profile case that involved ties to organized crime, corporate fraud, and a major lawsuit that had mysteriously been dropped. The case had faded from public attention, but the name had resurfaced in underground circles. The Regis case was a shadowed story, the kind people stopped asking questions about because the answers were often too dangerous. Her mind raced. Could this John Doe be the missing Regis? Was he involved in something so big that someone had tried to erase his existence? Driven by an urgent need for answers, Evelyn decided to push further, risking both her career and her safety. But as she stared at the man lying in his hospital bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she was about to uncover, it would alter both their lives in ways she couldn't yet foresee. As Evelyn continued her pursuit of the truth, she couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that shadows were closing in on her. The information she'd discovered about Regis gnawed at her, compelling her to investigate further, even as the hospital board's impatience with her rose. She was risking her career, but for Evelyn, turning back was no longer an option. In the following days, she noticed small, unusual occurrences, phone calls that ended as soon as she answered, footsteps echoing in empty hospital corridors, and once, she found her office door slightly ajar even though she was certain she'd locked it. These incidents chipped away at her sense of security, but Evelyn was determined not to let them intimidate her. One evening, she received an anonymous letter slipped under her office door. The note was written in hurried scrawl, warning her to stop asking questions. Evelyn's pulse quickened as she scanned the message, realizing that she was now in someone's crosshairs. But instead of backing down, her resolve only strengthened. She knew she had struck a nerve, and the letter confirmed her suspicion that John Doe's past was not just a tragic story, it was dangerous. She was no longer just saving a life, she was protecting it from those who wanted it erased. She confided in her closest friend, Dr. Karen Wallace, who had been by her side since her medical school days. Karen had always been the pragmatic one, balancing Evelyn's idealism with a steady, cautious outlook. Over coffee in the hospital cafeteria, Evelyn shared the events of the last few weeks, watching as Karen's expression shifted from disbelief to concern. "You're in deep, Evelyn. Are you sure about this?" Karen whispered, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "This isn't just your career on the line, it could be your life. People don't send warnings unless they're serious." Evelyn held Karen's gaze, her voice steady. "I know the risks, Karen, but I can't just walk away. There's more to this man than anyone realizes, and I'm the only one willing to help him. If I don't, no one will." That night, John Doe's condition took a sudden turn. Evelyn was alerted in the middle of the night that he had gone into cardiac arrest, and she rushed to the hospital. She and the team managed to stabilize him, but something felt off. The machines monitoring his vitals flickered, and his blood pressure fluctuated in ways that didn't match his physical state. Evelyn suspected interference, someone tampering with his medical equipment, possibly in an attempt to finish what had started in that alley. She stayed by his side for hours, feeling the weight of her decision to protect him pressing heavily on her. Meanwhile, she dug further into his identity, searching for any trace that might reveal the truth. One night, while reviewing notes in her apartment, Evelyn stumbled upon a detail that sent chills through her. A series of financial transfers from an offshore account were linked to Lakeside General itself, pointing to a network of individuals who had siphoned money from patients' billing records. Her mind reeled with the implications. There was corruption within the hospital, and somehow, John Doe was connected. Determined to piece everything together, Evelyn reached out to a journalist she trusted, hoping to expose the truth and protect her patient. But the journalist, a seasoned investigative reporter named Sam Rivera, warned her that going public might provoke a violent response. "People who are invested in these kinds of schemes don't go down easily, Dr. Grant," he said. "They've silenced others before." Despite the risks, Sam agreed to investigate discreetly. The next few days were a whirlwind of secrecy and tension as Evelyn and Sam worked together, exchanging information under the cover of dark parking lots and encrypted messages. Each new detail brought Evelyn closer to the truth, unraveling a story that connected corporate fraud, criminal alliances, and her own hospital's darkest secrets. She learned that Regis had once been a whistleblower in a case that would have brought down influential figures, had he not disappeared. The more she discovered, the more Evelyn realized the stakes. Not only was her career on the line, but now her safety, and possibly her life, was at risk. But she knew one thing for certain: she was in too deep to turn back now. She resolved to see this through, no matter the cost, for John Doe's sake and her own. As Evelyn pieced together the final fragments of the mystery, she knew she was close to uncovering the full truth behind her patient's identity and the danger surrounding him. Her late-night meetings with Sam Rivera had yielded unsettling results. John Doe, or Regis, had once been a prominent figure who exposed financial corruption linked to several powerful corporations. He had disappeared just as his case was about to go public, and his sudden absence had been explained away as a mere coincidence. But Evelyn knew now it had been anything but. Late one night, as she returned to her apartment, Evelyn noticed a car parked just a little too far from the curb, its headlights dimmed but still on. Her heart raced, every instinct telling her that someone was watching her. The door to her building was just steps away, but the air was thick with tension, and each step felt weighted with the knowledge that she was not safe. Just as she reached her door, the car's engine revved, and it sped off, leaving her with the undeniable feeling that she was being followed. The next morning at the hospital, Evelyn went to check on John Doe, only to find that his room was empty. Panic surged through her as she demanded answers from the nurses, but they seemed just as bewildered as she was. His disappearance was a puzzle, with no discharge papers or transfer orders. Dr. Collins, who had grown increasingly suspicious of Evelyn's unusual attachment to the case, approached her with a thin smile. "Looking for your patient?" he asked. "Turns out he's gone. Sometimes people just vanish, Evelyn. You, of all people, should know that." His words, laced with implication, sent a chill down her spine. She realized then that Collins might be more involved in the corruption than she had initially thought. He had known all along about the offshore accounts and hidden dealings, and he had likely played a role in hiding John Doe's whereabouts. But Evelyn wasn't willing to let him win. Fueled by anger and fear for her patient, she made up her mind to confront him directly. In a tense confrontation in Dr. Collins' office, Evelyn demanded to know where John Doe had been taken. Collins, maintaining his usual calm, leaned back in his chair, his gaze sharp and condescending. "Evelyn, you've always been naive," he said, almost amused. "This man you're so desperate to save, he's a threat to people who've built their lives and reputations on secrecy. If I were you, I'd let it go." Realizing he wasn't going to help, Evelyn left the office, her mind racing. Desperate to find answers, she reached out to Sam, and together they devised a plan to track down John Doe's last known location using hospital logs, cell signals, and any possible leads. As they dug further, a breakthrough came, a record of an ambulance that had been ordered under Collins' authorization but rerouted to an unknown location. The destination was a private facility known for its discretion, hidden away on the outskirts of the city. Determined to rescue John Doe, Evelyn and Sam decided to visit the facility under the guise of medical professionals. The facility was surrounded by high walls, almost fortress-like, but they managed to gain access through Sam's media credentials. Inside, Evelyn felt an eerie quietness, the kind of silence that only covered up darker secrets. They scoured the building until, at last, they found him. John Doe lay restrained to a bed, groggy but alive, his face drawn and pale. Evelyn rushed to his side, whispering his name softly. He opened his eyes, recognition flickering across his face as he mumbled, They wanted me gone." Just as Evelyn began to unstrap him, an alarm sounded, and footsteps echoed down the hall. Dr. Collins appeared with 2 security guards, his face twisted with anger. "You should have stayed out of this, Evelyn," he spat, his voice low but threatening. "You've meddled in things you don't understand, and now you'll both suffer the consequences." But Evelyn wasn't alone. Sam had discreetly sent a distress call, and police were already on their way. Within minutes, the authorities arrived, storming the facility and arresting Collins and his accomplices. As Evelyn held John Doe's hand, relief washed over her, but her mind was racing with the realization of how close she had come to losing everything. In the days following the rescue, the repercussions of Evelyn's actions crashed down like a tidal wave. News of her intervention at the private facility had spread through the hospital administration, and she was immediately called into a meeting with the board. The air was tense as she entered the room, facing a panel of stern faces, all of them seemingly indifferent to the life she had saved. "Dr. Grant," one of the board members began, her tone clipped and formal, "it has come to our attention that you have repeatedly disregarded hospital policies, culminating in a very public interference with a case that was deemed sensitive." Evelyn straightened, refusing to let their words shake her resolve. This man's life was in danger, and he was being held against his will. "I did what I felt was right." The board member exchanged a knowing look with Dr. Collins, who sat at the far end of the table, arms crossed, his face impassive but eyes gleaming with victory. "Be that as it may, Dr. Grant, we cannot ignore the consequences of your actions. Effective immediately, we are terminating your position at Lakeside General." The words hung in the air, but Evelyn didn't flinch. She felt a surge of defiance rise within her. Though losing her job was a heavy blow, she knew that if she had to do it all over again, she would make the same choices. As she packed her belongings from her office, Karen, her closest friend, entered with a look of sorrow and solidarity. "I can't believe they actually fired you," Karen said softly. "After everything you've done for this hospital." Evelyn managed a small smile. "It's okay, Karen. I'll find a way forward. This isn't over, not yet." As she left the hospital, Evelyn was greeted by Sam, who was waiting outside with news. "There's been a major development," he said, his face serious. "The police investigation has confirmed a network of corporate fraud linked to Collins and a few others. They've been funneling money through fake accounts for years, and John Doe was the key witness in a case that would have exposed them. They tried to eliminate him to protect themselves." Evelyn felt a swell of vindication. Her instincts had been right all along. John Doe was more than just a nameless victim. He was a man with the power to bring down powerful people, and that had made him a target. In the weeks following her dismissal, Evelyn found herself in uncharted territory. For the first time in years, she was no longer a doctor at Lakeside General, the place she had poured her heart and soul into. Yet, instead of feeling defeated, Evelyn felt liberated. She had lost her position, but not her purpose. As she processed the fallout, Evelyn threw herself into gathering the final pieces of evidence needed to bring Dr. Collins and his associates to justice. Sam, her ally in the investigation, worked tirelessly by her side, and together they followed every lead, unearthing a trove of incriminating documents, witness accounts, and financial records. Evelyn reached out to former patients, hospital staff, and anyone else who could shed light on the extent of the corruption at Lakeside General. One evening, Evelyn received a call from an anonymous number. The voice on the other end was familiar, John Doe. "They've realized I'm alive," he murmured, his voice frail but steady. "I don't know how long I can stay safe, but you need to know, this goes higher up than Collins. They're connected to people beyond the hospital. Be careful, Dr. Grant. They won't stop until this is buried." Hearing his voice stirred a wave of renewed determination within Evelyn. She realized that this fight wasn't just about justice, it was about protecting lives, including John Doe's. She'd come too far to back down now. She assured him, "I won't stop. And I'll do everything I can to keep you safe." Despite the danger, Evelyn took every precaution to protect her patient and herself. She strengthened her alliance with Sam, ensuring that they worked in complete secrecy, avoiding digital trails and meeting only in person. She also connected with a network of journalists who specialized in exposing corruption, hoping that the weight of public exposure would shield them from those who wanted to silence the truth. During this time, Evelyn's sense of purpose evolved. No longer was she just a doctor bound by the walls of a hospital, she had become an advocate for those whose voices were stifled by power and wealth. Her journey with John Doe had changed her. She was no longer the physician content to work within the system. Instead, she became a voice for justice and integrity, a woman willing to sacrifice everything to uphold her beliefs. As the investigation continued, Evelyn found a new sense of balance in her life. She connected with community clinics and shelters, volunteering her time to serve those often overlooked by the healthcare system. She realized that her mission had expanded. She was not only a doctor but a protector of the vulnerable. This work gave her fulfillment, reminding her that her calling went far beyond the walls of Lakeside General. With each passing day, Evelyn and Sam moved closer to revealing the full extent of the corruption within Lakeside General. Every piece of evidence they uncovered connected another figure to the scandal, from hospital board members to high-ranking city officials who had all benefited from the illicit financial network. They worked tirelessly, knowing that with each new discovery, they were closer to the climax of their pursuit for justice. During one particularly intense meeting with a journalist at a secluded cafe, Evelyn and Sam were approached by a man claiming to be an old friend of Regis, now known as John Doe. He slipped them a worn, yellowing photograph of John, taken years earlier in his prime, with a group of men in suits. "This is your missing link," he whispered. "These men are powerful, and they'll do whatever it takes to keep this hidden." The photograph revealed faces Evelyn recognized from news articles about political figures and prominent business moguls, people who wielded considerable influence over the city's resources. It was clear that Regis had once belonged to their inner circle, but something had gone wrong, leading to his disappearance. The image was a key piece of evidence, one that could turn the tide against Collins and his co-conspirators. But the encounter left Evelyn and Sam on edge, knowing the weight of what they held. As Evelyn delved further, she uncovered the full backstory of John Doe. Regis had been a whistleblower with a rare moral compass, someone who had tried to expose the dark underbelly of the hospital's finances and illicit dealings. His attempt to bring justice had been thwarted by those he had once trusted, who instead of supporting him, had orchestrated his disappearance to silence him for good. Only now, thanks to Evelyn's unwavering dedication, was the truth coming to light. Just when it seemed they were ready to expose everything, Sam received a threatening message warning him to back off. It was clear that their investigation had rattled those involved, and they were willing to go to extreme lengths to prevent the truth from reaching the public. Sam showed the message to Evelyn, his face tense but resolute. "They're scared, Evelyn. That means we're close. But we can't let our guard down." Evelyn agreed, steeling herself for the challenges ahead. Together, they plotted the final steps, making plans to meet with a reputable news outlet ready to publish their findings. The story was almost complete, and the final pieces were falling into place. Yet Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking on thin ice. Every moment felt more urgent, more dangerous, as if time were slipping away. In her final days of preparation, Evelyn met with John Doe one last time, now safely under the protection of trusted friends. His face showed the scars of both physical and emotional battles, but his gaze was unwavering as he thanked her. "You've given me a second chance," he said, his voice rough but filled with gratitude. "I only hope that what I lost all those years ago can mean something now, through you." The day of the big reveal had arrived. Evelyn and Sam had coordinated carefully with a major news outlet, ensuring that the evidence they'd gathered would reach the public without interference. The reporters were primed with every document, testimony, and hidden record Evelyn and Sam had unearthed over the past weeks. The story would expose not only the corruption at Lakeside General but also the broader network of powerful individuals who had used their influence to silence voices like Regis's. As Evelyn sat with the lead reporter in a secure location, she recounted the journey that had led her to this moment, the tension palpable in every detail. Her hands rested on a thick stack of documents, a physical testament to the lives ruined and the secrets buried for years. She knew that as soon as this story broke, it would send shockwaves through the city, potentially even the nation. Just as they were finalizing the article for publication, Evelyn's phone buzzed with a message. Her heart stopped as she read it. "You have one last chance to walk away, Dr. Grant. After this, there's no going back." The number was blocked, but the threat was clear. Despite the warning, she felt a surge of resolve, glancing at Sam and the reporter, who both nodded their silent support. They were all in this together, and there was no turning back. As the reporters worked to finalize the publication, a sudden flurry of activity broke out at the news station. Evelyn watched as technicians and journalists gathered, checking and double-checking files, preparing the story to go live. Every heartbeat seemed magnified, her breath shallow as she waited for the story to launch. Just as the countdown began, another message appeared on her phone. "It's not just you, Evelyn. Think about your family." The words hit her like ice water. She had distanced herself from loved ones during this investigation, fearing they might be targeted. But now, the weight of that decision fell hard on her shoulders. For a brief moment, she considered calling it off. The risk felt heavier than ever, as if her choices were directly putting others in harm's way. But just as doubt began to creep in, Sam's voice broke through her thoughts. "Evelyn," he said, his tone calm and steady, "if you stop now, all of this was for nothing. They want you to be scared. They want you to back down because they know the truth will destroy them." The conviction in Sam's words rekindled her courage. She took a deep breath, nodding as she felt a newfound resolve surge within her. She knew that Regis, John Doe, had risked everything to do the right thing, and she owed it to him, and to herself, to see this through. The broadcast began, and the anchor's voice filled the room, narrating the story as images of Lakeside General's financial records, offshore accounts, and statements from victims flashed across the screen. Evelyn felt an overwhelming mix of emotions as the truth was unveiled piece by piece. Dr. Collins's name appeared in bold on the screen, along with images of other high-profile figures involved in the corruption. For the first time, their secrets were exposed to the world. Just as Evelyn began to feel the weight lifting, her phone buzzed once more. This time, it was a message from Karen, her closest friend. "Evelyn, they've arrested Collins, but he's not going down alone. He's threatened to expose the names of everyone who crossed him. He's made sure the entire network will go down if he does." Collins's desperation was a testament to the impact of the revelation, and Evelyn realized that they had set off a chain reaction that would leave no stone unturned. She felt a sense of vindication, knowing that justice was finally coming. The broadcast ended, and Evelyn leaned back, exhaustion mixing with relief as she exchanged a glance with Sam. They had done it. They had brought the truth into the light, and nothing could hide it now. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe freely, knowing that all they had sacrificed had not been in vain. As the story reverberated across the city, Lakeside General and its implicated leaders faced intense public scrutiny. The news flooded every channel, showing headlines that spelled out the depth of the corruption, and names that once held influence were now associated with scandal. People were shocked, and the public outrage grew by the hour. Protesters gathered outside the hospital, demanding justice and accountability, while the authorities took swift action, beginning formal investigations and arrests. Evelyn, watching from a quiet corner of the newsroom, felt the weight of the moment settle in her chest. She hadn't expected to feel this mixture of satisfaction and relief. It was finally over. Her journey with John Doe, the sleepless nights, and the relentless pursuit of truth had all led to this, a moment that would alter lives, hers included, forever. The following days were a blur of interviews and statements. Evelyn shared her story, the reason behind her unyielding dedication to John Doe's case, and how her commitment to her oath as a doctor had driven her to go beyond the confines of her position. She spoke not only of John Doe's fight but of her own journey, a journey that transformed her from a doctor who worked quietly within the system to an advocate who stood firmly against injustice. Though she'd lost her job, Evelyn found a sense of purpose in her newfound role as a voice for those who had been silenced. Her story inspired others, and she was soon approached by organizations that fought for healthcare reform and transparency. The support and recognition reassured her that she hadn't lost her path, rather, she had found a new one that resonated more deeply with her values. In the aftermath of the exposé, John Doe, whose real name was finally revealed as Regis Davenport, was granted a new lease on life. His case, once buried, was now reopened, and he received legal and medical support from advocacy groups that saw him as a symbol of resilience against corruption. Regis, although still recovering physically and emotionally, was moved by the outpouring of support. He knew that without Evelyn, he would have likely disappeared, forgotten by the world. In her, he had found not only a doctor but an ally who had restored his hope in humanity. One afternoon, as Evelyn and Regis sat in a small park away from the cameras and attention, he thanked her with quiet sincerity. "You saved my life in more ways than one, Dr. Grant," he said, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and newfound strength. "I thought I'd lost everything, but you reminded me that there's always a reason to keep fighting." Evelyn smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. "You're the one who showed me that, Regis. Sometimes, we just need someone to stand by us to remind us of our own worth." Months later, Evelyn found herself standing in the bustling lobby of a new community health clinic. The space was modest but filled with warmth and energy. Sunlight poured in through wide windows, illuminating the bright, inviting colors that decorated the walls. This clinic, her latest endeavor, was a project she had dreamed of ever since she'd left Lakeside General, a place dedicated to providing care to those who were often overlooked. With funding and support from various healthcare reform organizations, she had transformed her vision into reality. The clinic was free from the pressures and protocols that once restricted her, focusing instead on compassion and accessibility. Staffed by a team of professionals who shared her dedication to serving the underserved, the clinic had quickly become a sanctuary for many in the community. Evelyn glanced around, feeling a swell of pride as she watched patients waiting with smiles, staff members moving purposefully, and children playing in the nearby seating area. Just as she turned to head toward her office, she caught a glimpse of someone familiar standing near the doorway, Regis, dressed neatly and looking healthier than ever, his face calm but touched by a smile. He walked over, a hint of emotion in his eyes. "I heard about the clinic," he said softly. "I had to see it for myself." Evelyn smiled, the gratitude in her eyes matching his. "It's people like you, Regis, who remind me why I do this. This place is as much yours as it is mine." They stood together in silence, two people whose lives had been intertwined by fate, both changed by the journey they had shared. As Evelyn looked around, she felt a quiet contentment settle within her. She'd found her path, a place where she could truly make a difference. And in this new chapter, she knew she would never have to compromise her values again. If Evelyn's journey has inspired you, remember that we all have the power to make a difference, no matter the risks. Standing up for what's right often comes with challenges, but it's through compassion and resilience that we can help bring justice and healing to the world. Share this story with someone who believes in making a difference, and may we all find the courage to fight for those who need us most.